This podcast is sponsored by Activia. Maintaining a healthy gut is key for overall physical and mental well-being. Whether you're a health-conscious advocate, an individual navigating the complexities of living with GI issues, or a healthcare provider, you are in the right place. The Gut Health Podcast will empower you with a fascinating scientific connection between your brain, food, and the gut. Come join us. We welcome you.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Gut Health Podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Megan Reel, a GI health psychologist.
And I'm Kate Scarlatta, a GI dietitian. What if I told you there was one nutrient that only about 10% of Americans are actually getting enough of? And it's one of the most powerful for gut health, heart health, and longevity. It's true. It's fiber. Us gut-loving fiber people, we do love our fiber, don't we, Dr. Reel?
We sure do. Fiber.
That's right. It deserves way more attention than it gets. The truth is, we're living in a fiber deficit. The Institute of Medicine recommends that women have about 21 to 25 grams per day. That's adult women, and about 30 to 38 grams of fiber per day for men. But the majority of Americans are falling short. And it really matters because large-scale research shows high fiber intake can reduce the risk of death from all causes, lowers heart disease risk, cancer risk by even 20%. Fiber is our gut microbes' favorite meal. So what exactly does fiber do, and why is it so powerful? And how can we get more of it? Without overthinking our meals, let's dig in.
I can't wait because I'm constantly thinking about this concept, and we're all questioning what does it actually mean and how do we do these guidelines. So today we have the perfect guest expert to join us, Dr. Heather Armstrong. She is an associate professor of gastroenterology at the University of Alberta in Canada. She has received numerous national and international awards for her work and over $25 million in research funding in her first 3 years as a professor. This funding supports her team's work to uncover how changes in the gut microbiota can affect the way the body responds to different environmental and dietary factors. She's also studying the positive and negative effects that result from infancy to adulthood in disease settings such as inflammatory bowel disease, multiple sclerosis, liver diseases, and cancer. We are so excited to have you.
So welcome to the Gut Health Podcast, Dr. Armstrong.
Thank you for having me.
So we start every episode with a myth buster, and we thought we would love you to bust a myth pertaining to fiber and gut health.
Okay. I think I get a little bit of heat for this sometimes, but I think one of the myths that I'd love to bust is the fact that not all fibers are good for us, and it really depends on who you are as an individual and your health status and whether you have a chronic illness or not.
I think that's a huge myth to bust. And I think one that really most people are just not attuned to some of the more recent research. Perhaps you're in tune because you've led some of this research and we're going to get into it because this is important stuff. You know, I think food interacts with our gut microbiome. It's so obvious, right? So clearly who's living there, they're going to like certain fibers or have the capacity to break them down or maybe don't. And that can lead to different things for different people. So fiber should really be individualized. And that's a great way to kick this off.
Yes, it is. And we're going to start with the basics. So let's break it down to this term we hear. What is dietary fiber? We've mentioned the guidelines in terms of how much men and women should be getting. Can you tell us, where do we start there with dietary fiber? And then what's the point? Why do we want to meet those recommendations?
Yeah, so, I think something that most people don't realize is dietary fibers are actually a type of carbohydrate. And I know, lots of people these days are scared of carbohydrates because they think of the sugars and the other molecules that fall under that term. But dietary fibers are just a type of carbohydrate that are considered largely what's called non-digestible. And so our gut does not digest dietary fibers the way it does other food molecules like proteins and sugars and things like this. Instead, we really have that relationship with the microbes that live in our gut, and the microbes assist us in that breakdown process. And so, when you think about dietary fibers, I think that's kind of the key concept to understand that differs from the other food factors.
And again, those guidelines of 21 to 25 grams for women and 30 to 38 for men, where does that come from? Why is that important?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think all things in nutrition and medicine, they're based on what we understand today, based on the health of people today and the lifestyles that we live primarily in, some of the larger first world countries that do a lot of this research. I think the values are a bit of a base minimum. You look at some of the diets that historically people would have had in some of the other regions of the world that are less studied than where we live. And you're really seeing, upwards of 100 a day in some of those communities. And so I think it's really, a base minimum for guidelines for what we are striving to achieve. And the purpose of that is the studies that have been performed on overall health. In the case of fiber, it's typically cardiometabolic, and kind of general obesity is where the wealth of the data has come from. There's a lot more recently coming out on specific disease settings, but it is the amount of fiber a day that a man or a woman of average size should consume in order to gain the greatest level of benefit. But it's not to say that that's the maximum that you should consume. It's not like a pill or a supplement where we're saying don't consume more than that. We're saying, that is the absolute minimum you should be trying to consume daily.
So crazy because, about 90% of Americans aren't meeting that target,
Exactly.
So it's mind-boggling to think of 100 grams of fiber, and it's so far from the way we eat, which, clearly is very ultra-processed and terrible. So not all of us.
Well,
Not
and
all
I
of
do
us.
sometimes wonder a bit if it's more to do with kind of society overall and our education of understanding where these fibers come from and how we can actually access them in easy nutrition and kind of just fresh fruits, vegetables, and grains. And I think a part of that in some of the work that we do with patients here, a part of that comes from, lettuce is not, even it's our favorite thing to put in salads and vegetable mixes, lettuce is not, a great source of dietary fiber. And so you may be eating a lot of plant, but that doesn't mean that you're actually eating a lot of dietary fiber. And so I think, trying to communicate with the public which plant-based foods actually have the highest source and the greatest breadth of types of dietary fibers is kind of something that we as a community need to be doing a better job of.
Could not agree more.
Yeah. We see this a bit in how food impacts mental health too. And again, clarifying kind of where things are coming from. And there was a large study that followed about 82,000 nurses for a decade. And they found that women who consumed more polyphenols, which are a type of natural compound that can be found in fiber-rich foods like oranges and grapefruits, and that those women that had more of that had lesser rates of depression. And so there have been other studies that have looked at polyphenols specifically. And we're not necessarily saying that, like, well, if you eat oranges, you won't have depression or it's the treatment for depression, but it does speak to the individuality of what we're eating, how we're eating it, the diversity of our fibers and different nutrients, and that it can have a profound impact on both our physical and our emotional health potentially.
Yeah, and I think it's every little bit helps because at the end of the day, I think the real take home for most people is, you need food to survive. Your microbes also need food to survive, and their primary food source is these fibers, these carbohydrate molecules. And so if you feed them correctly, they will be your best friend. And I think, there's this underappreciation in the public for the fact that the gut microbes are responsible for the vast majority of the production of dopamine in your body and all of these happy hormones that are directly involved in brain chemistry, serotonin and other pathways. So, this appreciation for keeping the gut microbiome healthy, and they will keep us healthy, but not to starve them by avoiding carbohydrates and plant-based foods.
Yeah.
Exactly. And just, we're talking about fiber, but the polyphenols also can act like prebiotics, when we're talking about food for our gut microbiome that promote some kind of health effect for the human host. So, the plant foods, just like when we think about fiber in foods, we're not just getting one type of fiber, we're getting a variety of different things. And it's one of the reasons why I really like Food First, of course, as a dietitian. You're getting so much more than just isolated fiber.
Polyphenols is something that's really stepping into the limelight a lot more recently. When we used to think of polyphenols, we thought olive oil.
Right.
And now more and more, I think there's this appreciation that the polyphenols often come bound to the dietary fibers. And so during this fermentation process in the gut, they're released and they go about their activities as well. So I think it's something that I typically like to highlight is that getting your fibers from whole food with those polyphenols, with those proteins, with those other nutrients is so important compared to trying to supplement your dietary fibers in with a very chemically isolated version of fiber entirely by itself, devoid of any of these other beneficial nutrients. So I think it's one of the reasons why so many of us in this industry really lean on, if we're going to get fiber, let's try our best to get it from whole foods because it comes with all of these other very beneficial nutrients like the polyphenols.
Yes, absolutely. So, when I was back in school a million years ago, we talked about solubility and insolubility of fiber, and then we stopped there. And obviously, fiber is much more complicated. That's solubility and insolubility. But can we start there and just describe what those differences are in those types of fibers and how they might impact our health?
Yeah, so we try to categorize fibers based on their functions, right? And so there's kind of these three key terms. One is the solubility of the fiber. So does it readily solubilize or dissolve in a liquid? So one example people think of is when you buy those supplements, can you dissolve it in water and
Right.
does it actually turn into a liquid properly? But another example of that is in the gut. So obviously our gastrointestinal system is filled with different liquids, saliva and whatever fluids we've drank, water, things like that. So do they break down and dissolve? And so are they going to have their effect through, dissolving and interacting with the microbes and interacting with us? Or are they not going to solubilize? And so they are going to instead contribute to bulking, which is kind of turning stool into something that's a bit more of a solid substance. There's other versions of this. So solubility is one way of separating the types of dietary fiber, and then viscosity is another. So does it form that gel gum? An example in the food industry is, when you put pectin and some of these fibers into a liquid solution, are you going to get a jam at the end of that? And are you going to kind of create this nice viscous substance? Again, that's kind of lending to how's it going to impact us, or is it going to impact the bulking of the stool as it passes through our body? Is it going to help with water absorption and some of these other things that happen as we pass through the bowel? And the third most common is fermentability. So, the fibers are not readily digestible. We don't do much with them, but even when you talk about what do our microbes do with them, there are some fibers that are very easy for a broad variety of our microbes to ferment and break them down. And there are some types of fibers that are largely not very well fermented by a human gut. They may be in a cow or a ruminant that has multiple stomachs and multiple spaces in the gut, or cellulose is a great example. It makes up our celery and our lettuce and these kind of structurally solid parts of our plant-based foods. There are microbes that live in the dirt in the forests that can ferment these types of fiber, but in our gut, that fermentation isn't very successful. So there's kind of these different categories that we use to try to identify what these fibers do for us in our gut.
Do you think those characterizations of looking at fermentability, viscosity, insolubility, etc., is that enough?
We can say, are there other ways to look at these? But eventually we hit a point where it's, I think we almost need to look at every individual fiber and ask, what is our goal? Is it kind of general overall health, or are we dealing with a different health condition that requires, maybe you've got a patient who suffers from diarrhea or a very fast transit time in the bowel, and so you're looking more at bulking. And so is there a definition of that we want to focus on? And so we could keep tossing out different definitions forever, I think, because these fibers are so complex. But I think at the end of the day, it's really trying to ask ourselves, do we understand what the different fibers do? And can we apply those to the patient or the person sitting in front of us?
Exactly.
And our patients hear that, right? So they see their gastroenterologist and they get oftentimes a blanket, eat more fiber.
Yes.
And then they walk out and they go, okay, what does that mean? Hopefully they're going to listen to this episode. But also, if you had to like quickly give up, like, how do you deliver that? Eat more fiber to your patient in the moment. If a listener is like, yeah, I've heard that and I have diarrhea or I have constipation.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think you've got to ask, what is the problem that we're facing up front? So if the individual sitting in front of you has no real clinical concerns, but they're interested in adding more fiber to their diet to improve longevity or performance or mental acuity, now you're trying to just balance out how do you eat a nicely balanced diet that's going to have a combination of different types of fibers. Whereas if you've got someone with, inflammatory bowel disease or someone with constipation or an emptying issue, now you're starting to ask, well, there are specific fibers that help us in this setting. Some are safer than others. In this setting, your microbiome may be unhealthy, so we need to account for that. Our team's in the middle right now of the final phase clinical trial to develop a precision carbohydrate diet, is what we're calling it, where essentially we use the microbiome and different human biomarkers to essentially define for that individual what's the optimal carbohydrates. And that's not just dietary fibers, but resistant starches as well, which kind of sit in a similar family to the dietary fibers. The microbes really utilize them and for the benefit of our health. And so the tool is set to use these biomarkers to define for the individual sitting in front of us what is the best combination and the best concentration of these carbohydrates to use to improve your health, be it disease or otherwise. So hopefully 2027, 2028, we'll have this tool clinically available. At the moment, it's complex. It kind of depends on who the individual is. Typically, if we're dealing with someone who has a GI condition, I would be recommending not to avoid certain types of fibers altogether. So inulin and fructooligosaccharide or FOS, they're kind of the beta-fructan fibers. They're the most common ones you'll see if you look for a dietary fiber supplement. And they're kind of the most famous too for nutritional interventions. They're great if your microbiome can use them, but if you're struggling or you're experiencing any symptoms, gas, pain, bloating after taking them, we'll typically say just take a small amount, let your microbes handle it, gives them the time to adjust to this, give those microbes time to grow and flourish so that your gut can handle these types of fibers. One of our favorite types of fiber at the moment is the pectins. You've mentioned citrus, obviously, and the polyphenol load that comes with them. A lot of the work that we've been doing has identified that the type of pectin, the source, and the polyphenols all together is what gives us that benefit. But I think something that a lot of our patients kind of are surprised by when we explain this is that it's not eating the flesh of the citrus fruit, which is so common for most people in the United States and the UK and things like this. It's actually the peel. It's the skin of the citrus fruits, primarily mandarins and navel oranges, that have the pectin and the polyphenols and all of those goodies. So we typically recommend that patients peel the orange and use it almost like a bell pepper or capsicum and cut it up. So you can put it in smoothies, you can put it in salads, you can put it in stir fries. It's a bit like a green pepper in that it's a little bit bitter, but it mixes really well the same way a green pepper would. So if you kind of use it the same way, you'll be getting access to those really beneficial polyphenols and fibers. So even in our patients who are sensitive, that's kind of our top choice for getting fiber back in their diet.
That is awesome. I love that. I've never heard of that. And I'm a huge smoothie person. So I'll throw anything in that smoothie. So, that's a great way to do that.
And just over the break, my 6-year-old was holding their orange and asked, can I eat this like an apple? And my husband and I both kind of looked at each other. We're like, I mean, you could try it. It's not going to hurt you. We usually peel that, but maybe he was onto something, clearly.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So you heard it here. Put those orange peels on the salad or eat them like a pepper.
That's right. And I just want to dial back a bit because I think you mentioned so much important stuff here. And I love the precision direction of, figuring out fiber for individuals based on their gut microbiome and other factors. That's amazing. I think, just as a reminder, especially working with a dietitian or a gastroenterologist, someone that is knowledgeable about fibers and your health, there are ways to modify. A good psyllium husk fiber, for instance, is a great way to help with constipation and diarrhea. So in those IBS patients with a mixed presentation, that might be something I might start with. Or you may find, certain patients with high cholesterol, and we'll look for those viscous fibers because they slow down digestion, grab the bile acid, help with cholesterol levels. So there's all these physiological things happening with different types of fibers in the gut. And we're not just getting one kind of soluble viscous fiber in, one type of food or vegetable. There's a mix of fibers in all of these things, but some foods will be higher sources of these viscous fibers. So while pectin is in the skin, right, that you just mentioned, but don't we see pectin also in apples, in the flesh?
Yeah, we do. Although apples are a really neat one too, because most of their pectin's actually in the seed. Yeah, and so it's funny. Growing up, I grew up in rural New Zealand, and so we were a little bit more feral than some people's upbringing, maybe. So we'd eat our kiwis whole and our citrus whole and the whole apple core and all. So, your parents would tell you, don't eat too many of the seeds, all of the cyanide concerns. But the amount of seeds you'd have to eat to actually get at the cyanide, and you typically have to crush the seeds to get the cyanide out of them, which doesn't happen in our gastrointestinal tract very efficiently. So, we have patients who ask about that. They're a bit concerned about, well, can I eat the seeds? But that is one of the big sources in apples of pectin. And so it is interesting that, what we typically consume isn't always the high fiber bit. And it's, even the beta glucans, which have, so much wealth behind them for this cardio metabolic effect and helping with obesity and cholesterol and things like this. The source really matters. And it's so interesting to watch the course of dietetics history that, we're really going for oats and wheats and whole grains and your breads and things like that lately. And I think we've still really lost this connection that we used to have with foods like barley.
Right.
You used to use barley in your soups and in your breads and all of these bakings, and it's quite uncommon these days to see barley as a food source, but it's another one of those foods that has a fantastic effect as a viscous fiber and a fiber that really helps with kind of overall cardiac health and
Blood
overall
sugar.
blood sugar.
All of that. So,
Yeah.
so barley's good, and oat bran are some options there for some of the viscous effects. So you mentioned kiwi skin, and it's funny because, people are like, that furry skin, but I use it in my smoothies. We just wash those kiwis, chop them up, freeze them. Don't freeze a whole kiwi because it just bounces around your blender. If you're going to do that, it's not a good idea. But anyway, just chopping them up and throwing them in the blender. Is the skin, I know it has some insoluble fiber. Does it have beneficial fibers that I'm unaware of?
Yeah, a kiwi skin is fairly limited bulk compared to the kiwi fruit. But again, there's some polyphenols and insoluble fibers that can be quite beneficial. And, the fur is, you see people who don't like a peach versus a nectarine as well because
Right.
of the fluffy outside. Getting rid of that fluff with just kind of a scrub brush or something while you're washing it can remove some of that fur, because there are some people who will experience kind of digestive issues or kind of some gas or bloating just from like the little furries that come on the kiwi fruit as well. So, it's something Kevin Whelan and some of the team at London College of Medicine and their dietetics group have always kind of leaned into this. Don't be afraid of the peels. Don't be afraid of the skins of the foods, because that's where a lot of the nutrient content can come from. And sometimes it's fiber, sometimes it's polyphenol, sometimes it's other vitamins and nutrients.
That's interesting. I don't know how I feel about the apple seeds and like cyanide, though.
We
I don't know. That's just not going to be
too
probably
much.
a big recommend. You might get a little cyanide. We'll see.
Yeah. I will say, I don't think I often eat the whole core of the apple anymore these days, every time at least, but I'm not afraid to if it's.
You survived and you're doing pretty well. So
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give it a go. Give it a go.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. So I think we've talked a little bit about intrinsic fibers versus natural fibers and the difference, but do you see a role for these in some ways to fill that fiber gap in some instances?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's not to strike fear and say that these supplements are all bad. It's just being mindful of, the volume that some of these supplements recommend is fairly unnatural. And we are really starting to see work out of not just my team, others globally, that if you go too high of a dose with anything, you might see a negative effect. And so just being wary that not your entire fiber source should be coming from a single supplement of a single fiber in isolation. But I certainly, getting people to change their lifestyle and diet is complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's convenience, sometimes it's cost. There's all kinds of different reasons for why. And so if at the end of the day, including a supplement in the best version of a whole food diet that individual can use, I'm not afraid to get them to use these different supplements, be it psyllium, like you mentioned, or these beta fructans like inulin and phos. They're beneficial. I just think everything in moderation and being mindful of if you can get that food from a whole food diet, then that's probably best. I will say my opinion, we have people ask quite often, the beta fructans are a great example. If you can get your hands on a chicory root powder, which you can find at a lot of supplement and health food stores these days, if you can get your hands on a chicory root powder, it's only 2 tablespoons a day. It is equivalent to the amount of beta fructan that you'd be trying to get from those same supplements, and the cost will typically be lower, and you'll be getting it as a whole food. It's a bit of astronaut food because it's often been dried or pulsed, but it is still the whole food. It's still the whole chicory root rather than being a chemically isolated supplement. So there are kind of still ways of going about this that I think it's best to still use a whole food source, even if it is powdered, rather than running straight to a supplement.
I think that's really fair that based on where you're starting, we want to give people an opportunity to have as much variety and options financially, access. It's a lot to consider, and we don't also want to overwhelm people with these goals.
This episode is sponsored by Activia. Backed by over 20 years of research, Activia knows that overall well-being starts from within. The brand was ahead of gut health trends and offers a broad range of products to help address the growing interest in this space. Activia offers a variety of probiotic yogurts and drinks that deliciously support gut health. Enjoying Activia twice a day for 2 weeks as part of a balanced diet and healthy lifestyle may help reduce the frequency of minor digestive discomfort, which includes gas, bloating, rumbling, and abdominal discomfort. Based on a 2025 national survey of doctors, including primary care, OBGYN, and gastroenterologist, Activia is the #1 doctor-recommended probiotic brand. Activia is a modern gut health innovator and is passionate about helping consumers feel their best. Check out Activia's client resources at activiaguthealthtoolkit.com.
That kind of brings me to my next question here in terms of a lot of times it requires low and slow. Because if you go from very low fiber to a very high fiber, tell us a little bit about what you've heard happens in the clinic, as well as it basically can cause some GI distress. But tell us about why.
If you didn't need a gastroenterologist before that, you might now, yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same as anything. So you need the microbes in place to be able to utilize these fibers. And if you haven't been eating much for dietary fiber to date, they're probably still there, but in very low numbers. And so you need to go low and slow in the sense that you need to give those microbes time to flourish. You need to give them time to say, well, this is my favorite food source, but I can only handle little bits at a time. And so the more you continue to eat, the more those microbes will grow, but you need to give them time to do that. So, going from 0 to 150 overnight, you don't have the microbes in place to be able to utilize those dietary fibers yet. And so you may be feeding the wrong ones, or you may end up with kind of unfermented fiber present in the gut, which our group and others have now shown can actually stimulate inflammation or pain and distress in the gastrointestinal system. So taking it slow and starting with kind of small amounts. Did you handle it? Are you still feeling okay? Okay, double it tomorrow. See what your threshold is, and trying a variety of different fibers, I think, is really the key too, rather than just, one supplement, one fiber type, because that's still only going to feed a subgroup of bugs as well in your gut. It's not going to feed a broad array of microbes.
Yeah, I kind of made that mistake with Fiber One bars and like grabbed these very high fiber bars with chicory root extract, take them to work, have one on the way, one at midday, and then you're like, oh my gosh. Yeah, not good. So, I think we need diversity of fibers to feed the diversity of the gut microbes. We want diversity in our colonic environment. So, this variety is really helping us hopefully create more of a diverse environment of microbes.
I think even if we look at the clinical trials that have been run, introducing either supplements or whole foods, increasing fiber, typically what you see is you start quite low dose for a week, and then you scale up, and slowly but surely you'll see these changes start to happen in the gut microbiome, and people start to feel better. I also say typically in our clinical trials, we've noticed it can take as much as 2 months to start to see that real significant shift in the gut microbiome. So giving yourself some grace and taking it slow can be quite important, because it's not going to happen in 24 hours. It's not a magic bullet. It's not a magic pill.
About how long should people expect it to take to kind of maybe see some health improvements in their fiber? And I get that this is probably, again, very individualized to what's going on. So you tell me if there's a little bit of an answer there.
Yeah, it completely depends on who you're dealing with. So
Yeah.
I think like the average population, we've done studies in kind of typically otherwise healthy people like firefighters and community members and studies like that. And if you don't have a lot of health problems to start with, it will probably take a couple of months before you start to notice yourself saying, oh, I feel a bit more awake in the morning. I feel a bit more focused. We've had individuals come back saying, I was on statins for cholesterol and now I'm not anymore. Or you've lowered your dose, so your cholesterol is just looking better. I'd say kind of expecting that 2 to 6 month period to see a real significant clinical change is quite normal. But normally in clinical trials, we say it takes a year really to see a meaningful clinical impact in a disease setting. You want to be kind of pursuing that 12-month mark. And the reason I say that is there are, interestingly, these clinical trials that have taken measurements quite early on, every couple of weeks, and immediately they see, oh, well, we saw these fantastic shifts at 2 weeks. But then as they continue out to the 6 and 12-month mark, the individual actually returns back to baseline. And so sometimes you can see these shifts simply by changing something about your environment or your diet, and they're not sustainable changes because maybe you're not doing enough, maybe it's not enough fiber yet, you're not at your tipping point yet. But just being mindful that, sometimes seeing these immediate changes isn't something that we're striving for. We're really looking for that long-term health benefit.
And most of the studies are just not going out that far. And I know it's costly to run a lot of these studies. So, that makes a limitation in advancing the science, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the bigger issues we often see in nutritional clinical trials is that on average, people will stop adhering or will quit a clinical trial after as little as 2 to 4 weeks. And so I think it's a struggle of balance between, yes, the cost of running a study for sure and the goal of completing it, but people's willingness to actually engage in these clinical trials and complete them and adhere to them and not want to quit at the first vacation or family event or birthday that comes up.
Yeah.
It's a real struggle when you're running these types of studies for sure.
Absolutely. So we kind of broached on this significantly to some degree. 70% of our microbes in our body live in our gut. They're interfacing with any food, particularly those that are not digested and arrive in the colon. And different bodies react to that differently. And what do we do with that? Or what do we know about how to do, other than listening to your body and saying, oh, dial it back? Are there other things that we need to pay attention to applying fiber recommendations in different populations?
It's amazing. I think a lot of the work that we've done has come off the backs of what dietitians already do. Dietitians are phenomenal at being able to listen to what's going on, try different subtle changes in nutrition, listen again, is it making a difference, and make changes just based on what's happening for that individual. And it's incredible how little of that has actually been grounded in real scientific knowledge of what's happening and why.
Yeah.
It's really rooted in experience, expertise, and kind of an understanding of, if you try this and it doesn't work, try this. And so, that experience from dietitians is really what led us to say, well, can we understand then the and why, so that we can identify much earlier in an individual how to intervene based on real biomarkers instead of this dietetics experience, which is phenomenal how well dietitians have been able to do this. But really understanding why and in who, I think, can help us better streamline these guidelines. So, yeah, like I said, I think, we are trying our best, and many others out there, many research groups out there are doing similar and trying to understand how does nutrition benefit the individual rather than having kind of streamlined guidelines for all. But at the moment, I think it's a bit of exactly that, just listening to your body. If something's not working, don't quit the first time, because maybe you had a bad sleep. Maybe you ate something else. Maybe you're identifying that food incorrectly. So
stress was high.
There's all kinds of things that can change our physiology in our gut, and it doesn't have to be blame placed on the food that you ate that day. So give yourself a rest, try again in a week's time, see if you can come back around to that and give it a go again, and really kind of hone in on listening to your body. But I think that diversity is probably the biggest key. If you can take small amounts of diverse different types, I mean, some people say try to get all the colors of the rainbow on your plate when you're dealing with plants. And I think that's probably a great way to go about it, because now you're dealing with diversity of plants and therefore diversity of not only fibers, but many types of nutrients, and kind of trying that approach, because diversity is key to our health and our microbiome's health. So I think it's probably the best approach that we have at the moment. And if you are really struggling, a dietitian is probably the end all be all. I don't think even most gastroenterologists are adequately trained in nutritional advice unless they have experience in it. So I think dietitian's probably actually your first best bet.
And we have more time. It's like I did a survey study with the American College of Gastroenterologists providers, the gastroenterologists and advanced practice providers, and 77% of them were spending 10 minutes or less on nutrition. That's fine. It's excellent that they're even broaching it, but it's not enough to talk about these complex diet-related symptoms and adjustments and personalization. So, yeah.
For what people spend on supplements or probiotics or,
Exactly that. Save on the supplements and ask the dietitian how to get that food naturally by changing which foods you're eating. I think you'd be best off spending your money there, because they'll be able to help identify what's missing or what you may be eating too much of, or where those symptoms are coming from.
Huge plug for Kate and all of our GI dietitian colleagues. We love you. We love you. We need you. We need you.
We wouldn't make it without dietitian, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, it's, finally getting its little day in the sun, because I've been doing this for a long time, and it was like, why do you want to be a dietitian? And I'm like, I'm just interested. I think this is going to be a really cool career. And it has been. So I'm glad I hung in there. You've got some very interesting research looking at particular fibers in inflammatory bowel disease and its potential, maybe less beneficial effects in a subset of them. Can you talk a little bit about the studies that you've done looking at beta fructans and IBD?
Yeah, for sure. So, we've got a study that was even just released in multiple sclerosis showing really similar. And I think there's two big take homes from a lot of what we've found so far is that, like we've said, low and slow seems to still be relatively safe, even in IBD patients and people whose gut microbiome is relatively unhealthy. But I think that's probably step one, is we are dealing with people who have significant changes in their gastrointestinal system, significant changes in the composition and functionality of their gut microbiome. So you can even have the correct microbes present in the gut, but if the house is on fire and the pH is off and there's huge amounts of inflammation present in that environment, even the correct microbes won't be doing anything other than trying to survive. They're not going to be functioning correctly. They're not going to be producing those neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. They're not going to be breaking down food. They're just going to be trying to survive. And so, this is a very unique scenario where you've got patients with a lot going on. And what we've started to identify, and others have done so since our study was released, is who is this happening in and why? And so, yes, you can have these changes that happen in the microbiome where the microbes aren't efficiently capable of fermenting beta fructans and some of these dietary fiber molecules. But another aspect of this seems to come down to what's changing in the gut itself, in the human cells that make up the gut. And so, there is an aspect of this that relates to, you've also got a patient with a disease setting where the cells of the gut like to create inflammation. They are primed to create damage. And so, I don't think, even if you have these changes that happen in a healthy individual, I don't think these inflammatory effects of beta fructan are going to be as significant. You may still experience gas and bloating and pain and some of these other effects, but I don't think it's going to be as equivalent as an inflammatory bowel disease patient where the cells of the gut are just ready to wreak havoc. And so that's what we're really trying to understand, because it's not even all IBD patients.
Right.
Some IBD patients, their immune system is primed in different ways. It doesn't seem to mind so much this engagement with unfermented dietary fibers, or their microbiome remains healthy enough to still utilize these fibers, and so they gain a benefit from eating these foods. And so that's what we're really trying to get at, is based on your gut microbiome and your own individualized gut and everything that makes it up, what is the best, most optimal types of carbohydrates for you to be eating to gain that benefit, that anti-inflammatory effect, that healing effect that we see in the gut. And so it's certainly complicated. I can't say what those biomarkers are. We're still identifying them in this final phase clinical trial and testing that this really works. But it really is partly the microbes, how they function, what does their fermentation success look like, and partly the human and what is your likelihood of either having a beneficial response if you see these unfermented fibers, or having a negative response.
So I have a follow-up question. And you may or may not be able to answer it. I'm not sure how this relates to what you're looking at in your study, but so for the individuals that appear to not ferment these fibers, have some kind of negative reaction from an inflammatory pathway activation scenario, are they feeling symptoms when they're eating? Like, is there a clear correlation with symptoms?
Symptoms seem to be the number one.
Okay.
The symptoms seem to come first. There's some individuals where we see the symptoms progress to gut damage, ulcerations. We even see in some individuals there seems to be a pathway that shows up that looks like it's involved in progression to colon cancer in these IBD patients that's affiliated with this, but it's rare. It's not all patients. And it really begs the question of, would they have to consume this and be in this flare state their entire life for this to actually culminate in colon cancer?
Right.
Or is this something that is urgent and concerning in a small percentage of these individuals? And is there a different prebiotic we should be focusing on in these people? And so those are questions that we're still trying to understand. But I think that's it. It's the fact that the first thing we see is symptoms. And so again, kind of coming back to listening to your body. If you are experiencing pain, distress, worsened diarrhea. We had a patient come in recently, and it was hard to keep a straight face and not laugh about this idea that they've said, well, I drink poppy now because it has inulin added into it, and that's supposed to be good for me. And as soon as I drink it, I get the worst diarrhea I've ever experienced in my life. So it's obviously working. And I said to her, that can't possibly be the goal. It's widespread diarrhea that is unconsolable is probably not the goal that we are looking for when you're consuming this. And so I think that's exactly it, that is not the desired effect of consuming dietary fiber, is this gruesome diarrhea that's unconsolable and prevents you from going to work in the morning. That's not what fiber is meant to do for you. It's supposed to regulate you and make you feel healthy. 1 to 2 bowel movements a day is normal, not 10 plus.
Liquid diarrhea.
Liquid diarrhea, that's not the goal. And so I think it's quite interesting that sometimes people measure success as an effect, whether it's good or not. And I think we need to get away from that. You should feel healthy. You should feel well. Your bowel movement should be normal. And that's our goal. And if you're experiencing anything other than that, I think this low and slow approach that Megan's mentioned is really important. That's where we need to kind of scale back and say, this is possibly a bit too much or possibly the wrong kind of fiber that we're focusing on.
Exactly.
Well, God bless her. She was trying, but it,
Yes,
it speaks to our messaging and also how society is targeting people, right? Like,
Exactly.
oh, well, I'm drinking prebiotic soda. That's better than regular soda. And well,
it's a great marketing scheme. And I think that's frankly all it is. And it scares me. It's another version of all grains are bad for you because gluten's bad. And it's hard to listen to. It's hard to watch patients go through this because they are just trying to get information, make sense of everything. And I think if they took the time to just sit down with a dietitian, they'd learn a lot more in that half hour to an hour than they would trying to scour the ends of the depths of Dr. Google. And it's just, getting this chemically isolated inulin in a soda pop instead of getting it from Whole Foods is just, it's concerning.
Well, and we hope that people will continue to tune into our podcast because we're science-based here. And, to not be too political, but there are some doctors in the United States right now that are touting a lot of confusing messages to people. And it's a lot to sift through.
I think it's the struggle when we try to simplify things into something that works for everybody too. And I think that's, politicians are always going to have things they do well and things that they don't.
Don't get us going. Don't get us going.
I think it just comes down to the messaging though, like what worked for an individual. And I think this kind of politician society, it comes back to kind of social media and everything that the communication that we have with people right now, following someone who doesn't have the same health as you, didn't live in the same region as you, didn't have the same upbringing as you, and having them say, well, this worked for me, so this will work for everyone. It's just not how the human body works, unfortunately. And so, trying to see either a professional who has experience working with someone who's in your shoes when experiencing what you're experiencing is much more important. At the end of the day, I think is trying to get access to that precision approach to health is probably more important than trying to get a one-size-fits-all approach, because I just don't think it's possible.
Exactly. And just to kind of reiterate, severe abdominal pain after eating, diarrhea, violent diarrhea, probably not what we're going for adding fiber. You will have an uptick of gas though. You might have slight bloating with a little bit of fiber too. And those are normal. It's if the bloating's painful, the gas is trapped and painful, those are different stories, but don't expect that you're not going to have a little uptick in gas because you will have a little uptick in gas. Sorry.
Yeah. And it's being mindful too, because I think, when people think of gas, I think that's something that people can be quite confused about too. So, the microbes produce gases like carbon monoxide and things like this when they're going through this process of fermentation. And so it's, your microbes will produce gas as a part of this fermentation process. But things to be wary of is, exactly that. If you are jumping from 0 to 100 overnight and you're experiencing gas that's excessive and very smelly, and these are gases that are being produced by microbes that are perhaps sulfur-producing microbes, and some of the microbes that we don't want to see benefiting from what we're eating. They're microbes that we like to kind of keep at bay. Their existence is important, but in small numbers. So kind of backing it up and going a little bit more slowly to allow those other microbes time to flourish and kind of keep some balance in the gut microbiome is really key. So, smell and volume of gas, I guess.
Yes.
I think it's just be mindful of. If it's excessive, back it up, take it slow. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want smelly gas.
That's, it happens, right?
It's all your microbes, blame your microbes.
That's right. Healthy microbes, hopefully.
Not with smelly ones.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Well, are you saying that I mean, come on, farts are going to smell. Farts are going to smell.
It's going to smell. It's a gas. At the end of the day, it's a gas.
And I guess it's also a subjective about how smelly it is.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's very subjective. But yeah, if you feel like you're struggling, low and slow is the key.
Low and slow. That's the main message. Personalization.
Is
Okay.
there any condition where a high fiber diet may not be helpful? I'm thinking like dyssynergic defecation or any dysbiosis. Any cues there?
There's certainly certain conditions where, from a dietetics perspective and a gastrointestinal perspective, we certainly try to limit the types of plants that people are consuming or the volume. And that really, I think that has to be guided by a healthcare professional. So I don't want to kind of just sit here and name
Yeah.
a list of conditions because I don't want people to run away and be like, well, I have this, so I should stop eating plants. I think that really has to be guided by a dietitian and a gastroenterologist. But there are certainly select disease settings where we do have to be very mindful. These are typically going to be gastrointestinal diseases that involve blockage of the bowel or thickening of the bowel wall or fibrosis of the bowel. And essentially the reason why I say it can be concerning is that you don't want to overbulk the stool and get to a point where the stool can't pass through the intestine safely anymore. And so you risk hemorrhaging the bowel, or you risk causing damage, or you risk just constipation to the point where you can't pass the stool. Those are kind of some of the dangerous settings where we want to limit the certain types of fibers that are involved as these bulking agents. Other fibers are still fine. They can be fermented, broken down. That's all okay. But any of the fibers like psyllium and some of these fibers that we would typically use to battle diarrhea and some of these others that help bulk the stool and thicken it, you've got to be careful with those in certain disease settings for sure.
Yep. Not one size fits all. I think we got that message today.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Should we move to the speed round?
I love the speed round, and it has been so much fun to talk with you. So I'm excited to hear your answers.
Exactly. We get to know a little bit about you, and we love learning, outside of research, which again, I'm going to link a lot of Dr. Armstrong's research, and we have other research we'll be linking. If there's any papers you want to share with us, Dr. Armstrong, feel free to, if I haven't read them already, because I'm a huge fan. But we're going to just ask quick questions, quick answers to get to know you a little bit better. So I'll start. What is your favorite high fiber food that actually tastes amazing?
I really love the citrus peels. I mix them in pretty much anything. I love them. Mix them in smoothies, mix them in any kind of baking or stir fries and things like that. I have IBD myself, and I find that it makes a world of difference with my gut health. So it's my favorite go-to.
That is an episode takeaway. I'm going to eat one like a pepper. I swear, I'm excited about this.
Yeah.
How about your morning routine? Coffee first or fiber first?
I have IBD, so I don't actually eat coffee. I avoid a lot of caffeine products. It's not a friend of my digestive tract as an IBD patient. But yeah, it's interesting because we've got this clinical trial going on right now and trying to get kind of higher beta-fructan into patients. The beta-fructan that comes from chicory root has this really interesting kind of coffee dark chocolate flavor to it. And so I actually tell our patients to mix chicory root powder into their coffee in the morning to get a little bit of both.
Amazing.
Ooh, that's a really good tip. Okay. What is your favorite way to relax after a long day at work?
I have 3 dogs at home. So when I get home, they always want to run around a bit and go for a walk. And my job as a professor involves a lot of sitting sometimes. And so, getting out for a walk with them at the end of the day and then just having a cuddle and a relax is kind of my go-to when I'm done a day of work.
I'm with you, girl. I'm with you, girl. I have a chocolate lab, and it's like she's only 2 and we're just constantly walking.
Oh, yeah.
She's busy, girl. Mabel June. Very busy girl.
I love that.
And what's a small thing that made you smile recently?
Oh, we actually had a patient finish our clinical trial this morning, and they emailed saying, thank you. This has made such a world of difference. They're going to keep going with it, and they can't wait to see this publicly available in the clinic. And I think, that is everything that we are gunning for, is not only that our research is interesting and we figure out the what and the why, but this actually has an impact for people. So it's just a great way to start the morning.
That's awesome. You made us smile too.
Yeah.
That's why we're in healthcare. And it's so nice when you can make a difference in someone's life. I mean, what a gift.
Yeah.
So is it music, movement, snacks, or naps?
I'll put music and movement together. I'm definitely one of those people that just likes to put the music on. And, in my office, I've typically got some music and a foot tapping, if nothing else. We're dancing around the kitchen at home. Or, yeah, that's my go-to combo for sure.
I love that.
Well, we appreciate your time, your research, your mind, and all that you're contributing to really the healthcare world. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to having another conversation at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me. We'll maybe come back when we've got this tool launched and we can talk more about it publicly.
All right. We will look forward to that.
Definitely. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. And to our audience, please subscribe, share, and give love to the Gut Health Podcast.
Thank you for joining us as we grow this gut health community. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a comment. You can also follow us on social media at the Gut Health Podcast, where we'd love for you to share your thoughts, questions, and experiences. Thanks for tuning in, friends. Thank you for joining us as we grow this gut health community. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a comment. You can follow us on social media at the Gut Health Podcast, where we'd love for you to share your thoughts, questions, and experiences. Thanks for tuning in, friends.